Labour's conference is still being dogged by the row over MP's penchant for accepting luxury gifts and hospitalities from wealthy donors, and the ongoing scrutiny seems to be fraying the temper of Health Secretary Wes Streeting.
I'm really proud of people who want to contribute not just their time and volunteering, but their money to our politics. It is a noble pursuit, just like giving to charity, and we don't recognise that enough. The alternative is we ask taxpayers to fund our politics. I think they'd rather their taxes went into the NHS and our schools or stayed in their own pockets.
That's so stupid. I mean, for a start, the amount of money that we're talking about here is quite small, right? So if you were to have taxpayers replace all of the money that comes from these big private individuals going to political parties, it would be absolutely minuscule. So the idea that these big wealthy donors are coming forward to save the rest of us money, right? It's talking to us, it's treating us like absolute children, right? This is like giving to charity. Does he also say that about the donors to the Tory party? Right? Does he say that to people who are donating to Reform, that these are just charitable individuals? Did he say that about Aaron Banks when he was donating to the Leave campaign? Right? This idea that we're reframing people who use their money to donate to political parties, presumably to get some influence back. The idea that that is just charity is just, I don't think anyone watching that is going to be convinced by Wes Streeting there. For those listening on the podcast, Streeting looked rather harried, his eyes bulging with frustration. But the Health Secretary isn't the only one wishing this would all go away. Starmer biographer Tom Baldwin seemed keen to characterise it as a media storm in a teacup.
It could have been better handled. There could have been a clothing allowance for the Prime Minister and his wife paid for out of party funds rather than a gift in kind from a particular person. But again, this is optics. And people are drawing this.
It is optics.
Equivalence. And I think there's a lot of genuine irritation here in Liverpool that people are sort of drawing equivalence between taking £5,000 for dresses so that you can look professional and good in election and not be criticised for what you're wearing, because she certainly would have been if she wasn't. And hundreds of millions of pounds handed out to your mates in PPE contracts. Yeah. What's that?
I said her husband's a millionaire and she works for a living. She can buy her own frocks.
He's a millionaire because he owns a house in London. I don't think actually they're rolling in money. I think they will be buying their own frocks or their own suits and their own glasses in the future. But this is like, people don't...
Why is that, do you think? Because the optics...
There's
genuine frustration, maybe not in Liverpool, but certainly around the nation. There is genuine frustration that the Prime Minister and his wife and the Chancellor and the Deputy Prime Minister were taking freebies.
They weren't taking freebies off the taxpayer. They weren't using hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money to hand out PPE contracts to their mates. Look, I'll just say this with greatest respect. I used to be a journalist.
Not, but go on.
And I broke a story about the last Labour government, about Bernie Ecclestone. That was, I think, genuine corruption. That was about a secret £1 million donation which changed government policy on tobacco advertising. Yep. This is about some frocks. And I think that journalists and the media need to show a sense of perspective, because if you draw equivalence between genuine scandals and this froth, I think, then you're not going to have the right words to describe the genuine scandals in the future.
One thing he did have a point about there, which was the Bernie Ecclestone stuff when he donated money to New Labour. That was secret, right? So what we keep hearing from the Labour Party, from Labour politicians, is we've followed the rules. And from what we know so far, they have followed the rules, right? But people don't like this. And people don't believe Tom Baldwin saying, if she hadn't worn a dress bought by this billionaire, people would also have complained, right? If she'd just worn a dress from H&M or Zara, right? No one was going to say, what the hell was the Prime Minister's wife wearing? That just, I've never really seen that happen in British news. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've just missed the articles. Baldwin there, Starmer's biographer, seems very cosy with him. He may be trying to minimise the row, but the public are pretty clear on it. 64% of people think it's unacceptable for MPs to take tickets to football matches or concerts from donors and companies, and 44% say it's completely unacceptable. Only 25% think it's okay. I mean, it's not just galling that politicians like Keir Starmer on six-figure salaries aren't dipping into their own pockets to pay for their lavish lifestyles. It's also an issue of influence. Who among us believes that these generous individuals and businesses are buying MPs gifts out of the goodness of their hearts? In the summer of last year, the now Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds and two senior Labour figures went to Glastonbury Festival as guests of YouTube. They weren't camping in a mud-spattered tent. Eva Reynolds declared that his swanky Glasto package was worth over £3 grand, as Adam Ramsey writes for Novara Media. Until then, Labour was promising to increase the digital service tax from 2% to 10%, which would bring in billions from giants like Google and Facebook. Literally the day after the festival, it emerged that Reynolds had ditched the policy. Voters would have to accept austerity instead. So this is the day after. Now, Adam Ramsey, actually, I do recommend reading the whole article. He's saying, no, it's not necessarily the case that decision was made because Jonathan Reynolds had just had a fab time in a teepee at Glastonbury. But, YouTube clearly thought it was more beneficial to have that conversation dancing by the pyramid stage than it was to have it in business attire, in an ordinary meeting, which is minuted. Now, again, this is not to suggest that Jonathan Reynolds made this decision at the pyramid stage, but you can see why questions are raised in situations such as this. There's another story, though, around Labour donations that's getting less attention than it probably should. And it turns out it's about the largest ever donation to the party. So just before the general election, £4 million was given to Starmer's party from a Cayman Islands hedge fund with shares in arms and fossil fuels. The hedge fund is called Quadrature Capital. They told Open Democracy this about that £4 million donation. In May 2024, we came to the view that a UK government with a commitment to the green transition of the economy would have the ability to drive change that is so urgently needed. Having analysed commitments set out by each party, we donated £4 million to the Labour Party in support of policies that will deliver climate action while also promoting social equity and economic resilience. Oh, they sound wonderful, don't they? Quadrature Capital. And of course, one might question whether a commitment to climate action is consistent with investments in fossil fuel companies. But on that front, the company also had a defence. This is from that Open Democracy article. After publication of this article, Quadrature said it uses market-neutral trading strategies, meaning it holds long and short positions, stocks at the same time, and does not hold any position for extended periods of time. Hedge funds typically use such trading strategies to try to profit from both the rise and fall of stock prices. The company added that SEC filings do not fully represent its position towards various industries, including the oil and gas industry, as SEC regulations require the fund to disclose only its long positions, i.e., a bet that the price of a given stock would rise at a particular point in time, but not its short positions, i.e. that the price of a stock would fall. That was very complicated, but that was a reminder. I had to be sort of reminded what hedge funds do. They basically make lots and lots of little bets, and they bet. They try and sort of balance out their bets. So they're betting this stock might go up, this stock might go down, and they don't tend to have long-term positions. So their argument there is they don't necessarily have an interest in, say, oil prices going up or the share prices of oil companies going up because they might have as many bets that they're about to go down. I still don't think that makes this really any less shady. And another element of this story that's interesting is the timing of this information being released. This mega donation was made to the Labour Party just after the July general election was called. So after it was called, but before it happened. The details about it were only published last week, though. And earlier today, I spoke to Ethan Schoen. He's the author of that piece. And I asked him if that delay between receiving the donation and publishing it was normal.
No, in a word. I mean, we risk getting into the kind of, especially exciting realms of like electoral commission rules and regulations here. But the kind of quick version of this is that, generally speaking, large donations to political parties, that is over about £11,000, they are the parties keep a record of those, and for every quarter, they will file a return to the Electoral Commission, which is then published by the Commission on their website the following quarter. That's how it works generally, which I think makes sense. Outside of an election period, there's not really a great argument for a faster kind of process of transparency than that. But what happens during an election is, in recognition of the fact that people might like to know who is funding the parties that they decide to vote for or not. During the election, what happens is we enter a period during which the Electoral Commission requests that same information on a weekly basis and publishes it on its website within a week. So the election was called, and due to a kind of quirk, or you might call it a loophole in the regulations that determine this kind of thing, there is a week between the election being called and what's called the kind of official pre-poll reporting period coming into effect. Now that's when the donations are made public before the election where possible. Some stuff comes in on polling day and that comes out quite soon afterwards. This donation happened to come in during that week between the election being called and the pre-poll reporting period. Now, we can probably talk a bit about what we can infer from that, I suppose. But I think it's worth noting that the amount of kind of discussion and the pure practicalities involved of a political party accepting a donation of this amount of money means that it is completely unfathomable that the first that Labour were made aware that this donation was coming was a matter of days before it came in, and therefore there wasn't some intention behind it being accepted during this period in which it would only be made public after people had voted in the election.
So you think sort of that they went for this loophole because they potentially said to them before that when the election is called, give us this donation, but early enough that we don't have to declare it? I mean, is that the assumption?
I would say so, and I mean, I think there's a number of reasons to suspect that that's the case. I mean, firstly, there was a kind of pre-existing connection between Quadrature and the Labour Party. As an organisation, Quadrature had never donated to Labour before; it's never donated to any political party. But a very senior member of staff at the firm had given. I think when this donation came, he had given around £250,000, probably slightly more, to the party in the preceding year or so. He was a kind of early donor to Labour Together and had since given to the party to the tune of about £250,000. There's also kind of, I suppose, what you might describe as like a bit of a history here, particularly during the Starmer project. Starmer himself, during his leadership election, I'm sure many people will kind of remember this, acted within the rules for MPs declaring donations, but he intentionally waited until after Labour members had voted in the leadership election to declare a number of his kind of big money backers. And I think had the names of those backers been made public, it would have undermined the image that Starmer kind of tried to portray in that election, which is one of kind of continuity Corbynism, but like in a suit. There were people that had long been associated with the Labour right, and I think there's good reason to believe that was done intentionally. You also have Labour Together, this kind of Starmerite think tank / kind of super PAC, which in its very earliest days took an awful lot of money from some of the same figures that gave to Starmer's leadership campaign. But for a long time, over a couple of years, no donations were declared to the Electoral Commission as they should have been, and Labour Together ended up being fined by the Electoral Commission for a number of breaches of electoral law. The common thread throughout all this, as well as Keir Starmer, is Morgan McSweeney, who we know has a very key role in Starmer's Downing Street operation. He had a key role while they were in opposition, and he was a central figure, and he was, I believe, the director of Labour Together at the time that there was a failure to make these donations public and declare them to Electoral Commission. So, I think viewed in that context, and when we consider the practicalities involved of accepting a donation like this, and we know it's not unusual for big donors to say, look, we will back you in the election with this much, so parties can plan ahead. That's to be expected, I think, and quite normal. But the decision to have it accepted during this brief window of kind of intransparency, I think it's very hard to believe that was a coincidence.
You're saying both when Keir Starmer was sort of a leadership candidate and then as leader of the party, you're seeing a similar thing where the rules are formally followed, but they seem to have a preference for big donations to be revealed after key elections as opposed to before them. What would Quadrature Capital be getting out of this? I mean, that's the obvious question here, isn't it? And I suppose, on the one hand, you're talking about this hedge fund in the Cayman Islands. This sounds very, dodgy to most people. At the same time, you're saying they've got a climate fund, they donate to climate charities. I assume, sort of, you were speaking to someone from the Labour Party, you'd say these are people who have an interest in in having a livable planet. Maybe, I'm not sure. And a cynic would say these are the kind of people who want tax cuts, who want tax havens to be protected. How should our audience understand what this kind of company might be wanting from a Labour government?
There's a couple of things to consider here. There's Quadrature, the hedge fund itself, which I think it's perfectly possible to believe that they, as an organisation, have chosen to use some of their profits to fund specific technologies and research in specific areas or specific projects that we would generally recognise as being kind of a good thing, to kind of put it in that technical term, like. But I think it's equally worth considering that these investments that they make in these projects that they support, they may well find themselves in a position where these technologies require further down the line large amounts of kind of state subsidy to get off the ground. They might find that further down the line they have to kind of, I suppose, fit into an arrangement with the public sector, for instance, or that they end up working hand in hand with the government on these kind of public-private partnership financing deals that are so common now and talked up massively under this Labour Party. So I think there's a practical element to even the kind of climate donations and the climate funding that they do. But I think it's also worth seeing this donation as part of a broader picture and a broader shift in the kind of interest groups that Labour represents and that give them so much money. I mean, if you think of Quadrature as a hedge fund and as a financial organisation that fits broadly into that sector, £4 million is an awful lot of money, but it's part of a huge amount of money that's come in the last couple of years to the party from individuals and companies that are either kind of actors within the sector currently or have very strong ties to it. So it might be an individual that used to run a couple of hedge funds or a trader or bankers, or it's organisations like Quadrature. We're talking about probably 13 plus million since 2022. And to put that in context, the three biggest trade union affiliates to Labour in the same period gave less than that. They gave around £12 million. So I think if we're thinking about, broadly speaking, who and what the Labour Party represents and in whose interests it acts, we have to kind of consider who, who's funding it, really. And I think there's an interesting parallel to draw there, I suppose, between how hedge funds operate and what their money actually is doing. When they put money into a given security, it's essentially kind of a bet on the movement of that. And so by putting £4 million into the Labour Party, there's kind of you can almost see it as just one of their investments that they are hoping will pay off, and they see benefit to themselves from that investment generating a return. But I think it's important to see it in the context of a big shift toward finance and the City of London in particular throwing its weight behind Labour and what we can kind of draw from that.